Here to talk more about what this election could mean for Canada and Canadians, two former ambassadors, Canadian ambassador to the United States, Gary Doer. He served in that position from 2009 to 2016, and former U.S. ambassador to Canada, David Wilkins, who served in the position from 2005 to 2009. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for the conversation. Mr. Doer, I'll start with you. You spent, as I just mentioned there, a number of years here in D.C. In your view, how consequential potentially is this election?
Well, it's very consequential in a number of different ways. The presidency obviously is the chief officer of the United States, and the Senate is potentially going to change. I think it will change to the Republicans in this election. That's important to Canada. And the House is up for grabs. It's very close for 6 seats going either way. In a House of 435 seats, we may not know the final results right away, but that's certainly important to Canada because the House and the Senate have to ratify trade agreements. And that's very, very important. Back to Kelly Craft's comments, I've said this before on the show, I do believe Canada signed on to the NATO commitment of 2%. I believe we should keep our commitment. David Wilkins and I were on a panel a couple months ago, or 6 months ago in Boise, Idaho. I said that there, and I'll say it to Canadians now. I think Canadians, though, would prefer us to do it, increase our defense spending for our own sovereignty. More, why should we be scrambling jets from Minot, North Dakota to the Arctic Circle to protect our sovereignty? So I think one of the things I worry about that we've taken so long, that Canadians would prefer us to do it for our own sovereign purposes rather than just being told what to do by somebody else, even though they're our good friends and neighbors.
Ambassador Wilkins, I'll pick up on that point and ask you in your view, because I think clearly it means something to Donald Trump, but we've also heard from Joe Biden and Americans in his administration over the last number of years that they would like Canada to speed up the rate at which they're spending on defense, but also the amount. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Do you think going forward, no matter who wins, that's going to be a key part of the relationship between our two countries?
I do. Certainly if President Trump is reelected, it will. I also think it's good strategy for Canada. The more Canada is involved on the international stage and helps and aids and is a partner with the U.S., the more you can get done. I saw that on George W. Bush and Stephen Harper and the softwood lumber issue. Canada was involved in a big way in Afghanistan. And Bush wanted to help Harper to solve domestic issues because Canada was playing such a big role on the international scale. This is the same thing.
Mr. Doer, in that interview with Ambassador Kraft, there was kind of an explicit tie that she made between defense spending and ultimately what kind of trade relationship exists between our two countries. Do you think the relationship will be that explicit under a President Trump, if that were to be the case going forward?
Well, I thought it's not just President Trump. It's how many senators signed a letter to Canada, and on both sides of the aisle, good people that are good supporters of Canada. And Ambassador Wilkins mentioned the softwood lumber agreement. There's many missions that Canada was involved in when I was there. Libya, for example, was a mission, and of course Afghanistan. We were in the toughest part of Afghanistan. I think I remember General Petraeus saying to me that Canada is in the toughest, most dangerous part with the greatest skill, and that was kind of the culture all around Washington D.C. Whether it was the president, the vice president, the Senate, the Congress, they knew that we weren't just talking about being allies, but we were acting as allies in very, very important macro conflicts.
Ambassador Wilkins, on the greater subject of trade, which is kind of what brought me to that point with Ambassador Kraft, we have heard a lot from both candidates on, for example, NAFTA, in the view that 2026 won't just be a review of that trade deal, but a renegotiation. How safe do you think, or unsafe do you think, the trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. is right now?
I think it's safe. I think it's strong, and it's the greatest trade relationship the world's ever seen. It is interesting to note that President Trump obviously was part of the negotiations of USMCA. Then Senator Harris voted against USMCA. So it'll be interesting how she, if she is elected president, how she deals with that issue that she once opposed.
Yeah, Mr. Doer, objected to the new NAFTA largely based on the fact that she would characterize it as not going far enough on climate change, which is a different set of concerns than what the former president brought up. But nonetheless, she was one of 10 senators who voted against it. What's your best advice for the so-called Team Canada that will be contending with an increase in protectionism, one that has evolved over the last number of years, really obviously to different levels, but regardless of who's in office?
Well, we have to keep emphasizing the fact that we're the United States' greatest customer. President Trump, former President Trump, made that speech at the Detroit Economic Club, which is, if you look out at the windows of the Detroit Economic Club, you can see the Gordie Howe Bridge almost being completed across our two borders. Why? Because the United States needs our customers and we need their customers. So if you look at when former President Trump was in office, Sonny Perdue, the former governor of Georgia, was the ag secretary, and he took a map into the cabinet room and pointed out how much agriculture in the United States depended on customers in Canada. So we've got to talk as customers. We also have to be allied with the United States, whoever is president, on the fact that Mexico, unfortunately, is hosting a number of state-owned enterprises from China, which are completely undermining the trade agreement that was reached by President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau. Now, President Trump's called it the greatest trade agreement in the history of the world, so how can he possibly want to change it? Having said that, we have to be together with them on this issue of undermining the trade agreement through state-owned enterprises taking jobs out of both Canada and the United States. So, let's not dither on this stuff. Let's just get right into it.
The Mexico factor, I think, going forward, if Trump is successful, will be key. He actually took aim directly at Mexico today, threatening 25% tariffs. I believe we have that clip. Can we play that?
But now we have a new president in Mexico, and I'm going to inform her on day one or sooner that if they don't stop this onslaught of criminals and drugs coming into our country, I'm going to immediately impose a 25% tariff on everything they send in to the United States of America. If that doesn't work, I'll make it 50. And if that doesn't work, I'll make it 75 for the tough guys, and I'll make it 100. Then I'll make it 100.
Ambassador Wilkins, the former president is, using tariffs in a punitive fashion, as you could hear in that capacity, but also has threatened them across the board at 10% on all imports, including including Canada. You would assume he hasn't made any exceptions for Canada. How serious do you think he is about that?
Well, I think I think he's very serious about what he said about Mexico, and I think the American people support that. If anything, in this race, we're looking at the economy, and we're looking at immigration and security on the borders, and that's what is exactly what he's saying. We had almost 5 million immigrants, cross the border illegally under the Biden-Harris administration. That's less than we had about 1 million under the former administration of Trump. And American people want the border secure, and he's telling Mexico, you got to help do that. I think that's going to be supportive. Now, I'm more of a free trader. I'm more of a George W. Bush free trader. So, I think Gary Doer can tell you this too. People run for office, get elected, and sometimes what they said on the campaign stump, they don't try to exactly impose. So we'll just have to wait and see. But one tariff that I'd like to see worked on seriously with some political willpower is on the softwood lumber, which is now we've collected over $10 billion from Canadian lumber companies over the past several years, and It hadn't been resolved under the Biden administration. Hopefully it will be resolved under the new Trump administration.
Well, I
That's a
know
good
the
point.
Canadian, I have to end it there, but I know, yeah, the Canadian, maybe Mr. Doer, I just have 30 seconds on the softwood lumber, because I know the Canadian side is hoping for some resolve there too.
Well, if you want to deal with inflation and house costs in the United States, the softwood lumber agreement that David Wilkins was involved with Prime Minister Harper and President Bush works. So lower the cost of housing, buy Canadian softwood lumber.
Okay, we're
my
going to leave it on
paid
that note. Thank you much.
today.
Thank you very much, both of you, for making time for the conversation. I do appreciate it. Former Ambassador David Wilkins and former Ambassador Gary Doer.